and thank you very much for coming. I know it's week 8, and week 8 is full of all sorts of trials and tribulations, but we felt that it would be very nice to have a little series of chats that are a celebration of our new departmental Inspiration Fund. The Inspiration Fund was very generously endowed upon us by the head of department when she found that there was some money to spend, and Research Committee had a conversation about the best way to utilise this money, and we thought it would be very easy just to throw the money at the usual old things, but let's try and do something a little bit different. And what we decided was to set up a fund with small amounts of money that anybody who does research in the department could apply to do research or research related activities that they've been desperate to do but haven't been able to get the money to do, that bring something new to the department. And certainly we didn't want things that were just a continuation of an existing project or a little bit of money to top up something else that's already got money. We wanted new ideas that would set something running or would have a lasting impact on a wider part of the department. And out of that we had a number of applications which were vetted by the Research Committee, and out of that came 7 successful winners. And those winners are each going to give us little talks this morning, 7 winners, each with 7 minutes to inspire us through a TED-style talk, giving us an idea of what they've done and what they're going to do with this little pot of money that they've had. And if this works, we'll continue this into future years. Interestingly, we're very much into equality and diversity in the department and empowering people. And what's very nice, as you will see from these talks, is that we have a mixture of people who are established academics, a mixture of people at earlier careers of their stages, and a really good gender balance as well. So we tick all our boxes here to say that we're moving forward in a very positive way. And there's no better person to start our 7-minute talks off than the head of department. The head of department, through fair competition, was awarded one of these. I have to emphasise it was completely fair competition.
I wasn't on the panel.
She was not on the panel. The head of department, Heather, got one of the 7 awards, and Heather's going to talk about her Heritage Network scoping strategy. And what's going to happen, Heather, and everybody who follows, is that a key person in this whole process, Gillian Willis, is going to keep you to time and warn you when your 7 minutes is nearing the end, and then she will cut you off in a brutal manner. So with no more ado, Heather, over to you.
Okay, so why a heritage network? Well, perhaps first of all, what do we mean by heritage? So heritage covers a whole range of things: cultural heritage, natural heritage, objects, sites, buildings, people, tangible and intangible heritage. And it's something that I believe Oxford has great expertise and interest in. And I got this small amount of money to do a scoping study for setting up a heritage network in the university. And I should say that I worked very much with Lucy Fusade and Catherine Jang, and when I say I worked with them, they have done the work so far for us. So the aims of this project are twofold. Firstly, to evaluate the demand for and perhaps the potential purposes of a heritage network within the university. And secondly, to build on the experience of a previous cultural heritage programme and the One Networks, which have been hugely successful. So the Cultural Heritage Programme was established in 2013 and has been a rather esoteric attempt to bring together people interested in heritage. And the One Networks, as you know, are individual networks of biodiversity, climate, energy, food and water, and seem to be very dynamic and vibrant, and something that we thought might be a good model for a potential heritage network. So what have we done so far? So the first part of this involved a lot of talking to people. That's kind of my role in this project, is to talk to people, to find out perhaps a little bit more about what the perils of networking, what the advantages of networking might be. And the most exciting thing at this stage is the huge positive response I had from a number of influential people, including the head of the Humanities Division, various research facilitators, and people within GLAM being, in this case, gardens, libraries and museums. Katrin and Lucy then sent a survey to about 90 researchers on an initial database we had, and so far within a few days we've had 60 replies, which I think again is very positive. So we've asked a series of questions. The graph on the left here summarises the disciplines that people work within, and you can see that we've managed already to get feedback from a range of people, many of whom are already working on heritage topics, but in a very wide range of settings. We've also asked them what kind of research they do, and again there's a lot of research on the science, on digitisation, but also on public engagement and other activities. And if you look in detail at the feedback, we've already got a very wide range of people. So what do they want? What from this can we glean already about what a heritage network might involve? Well, we focused on asking two sets of things. One, what kind of online resources people would like, and clearly there's a huge demand for people, from people for a list of research projects, a directory of researchers involved in heritage, and kind of a bulletin board on what kind of seminar series are on offer. And that should be relatively easy to establish. Secondly, we asked them about what kind of physical networking activities would be useful. Notice here 21 people wanted wine and cheese. We were surprised. I think I would quite like that now as I'm starving. But clearly a demand for food is there. But also there's a strong demand for seminars, workshops and talks to bring people together. And we've discovered that people would like something once a term, and people are very keen to come to this kind of thing. So where are we at and where are we heading? So Katrin has very kindly set up a mock-up web page, and you see it needs populating. But we've got the bare bones of that, and that's really derived from the One websites, which I think are particularly good models. We're going to carry out more survey work, so if anybody wants to complete our survey, please talk to Lucy or Katrin, who are sitting over there, and they'll send you a copy of that. We'd like to get 100 replies to prove to people that there really is a good demand for this. And we're also now embarking on trying to raise funding to support a part-time network coordinator. And I'm pretty confident that between the Humanities and the Social Science Division, we should be able to have something up and running later on this academic year. So that's what we're doing, and you can contact us via our email address, heritage@ouce. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. We're not doing questions, are we, Gillian? No, we're not doing questions. That's why we're having lunch afterwards, to which you're all invited, free lunch, upstairs at the end of the 7 talks. So you will imagine there's a big diversity in the projects that we've funded, and next we have something completely different. And Alison Smith is going to come and talk about a project that has the longest title of all the 7 that we put together. And if I get this up, it's an online tool for participatory mapping of cultural ecosystem services.
Okay, so we're developing an online tool for mapping cultural ecosystem services. These are the benefits that people get from experiencing nature. So it can be the aesthetic value of looking at a beautiful view or the patch of green outside your window. It can be the benefits of getting out into nature for relaxation or to interact with wildlife, to learn from nature for education or research, to find opportunities for recreation, adventure, inspiration, and to find special places and landscapes and species which contribute to local identity and a sense of place. There's good evidence now that access to nature improves health and well-being and also has social and economic benefits. But these are often neglected in decision making about land use, partly because it's difficult to map and measure these intangible benefits and services. And as a result, access to nature is actually under threat for many people. There's a great pressure for losing green space to development. There's 1 million new houses, for example, planned just for the Oxford to Cambridge growth corridor. You might know that only 6% of UK land is actually built upon, so is there actually a problem? But actually, most of the rest is intensively managed farmland. There is 35% natural or semi-natural land, but if you look at how this is distributed across the UK, between all the different UK local authorities, you can see that most of the green natural space is up here in Scotland, Northern England and Wales. And actually, out of 391 local authorities, 160 have less than 5% natural land, and 50 have less than 1% natural land. Many of these are cities, and you can see that, for example, Oxford has 1% natural land, which may not be surprising, and often these places have lots of green urban space to compensate for that. So Oxford has 16% urban green space. But Cherwell District Council in the north of Oxfordshire has only 1% natural land and 3% green urban space, and much of the remaining natural land there is being lost to development. So there really is a problem. Access to nature is actually under threat for many people. So how can we demonstrate this value? Well, one way is through participatory workshops, and we've held workshops for local people in Essex and Warwickshire and also in Vista, where they actually map the places which provide different services such as aesthetic value, recreation, education. These produce paper maps, and we can transcribe these maps into GIS systems, so we then compare them with other data sources. For example, we've looked at Flickr photos that demonstrate aesthetic value or interactions with wildlife. And that's great, and it provides a lot of detail on the current value of existing green spaces and also threats and gaps and opportunities to improve the cultural services. But you can only involve a limited number of people doing this. So Essex County Council took this one step further and developed some mobile exhibition boards, which they took around places in Chelmsford. You can reach more people this way, but you also gather less information on the people providing the data. So for example, we've no idea how many different people contributed to these 200 different points that they mapped. So an online tool could reach many more people and could digitise the data easily and gather demographic data as well. There are some existing apps that other people have developed. This one, you can enter a place, you can tick which services it provides, and you can provide a comment and even upload a photo. But this is a proprietary tool developed by a consultant, and it's only been applied so far to a test area in one small place in Cumbria. There's also this thing called SHMAPT, which has been applied in Sheffield. This has a slightly different focus. It's aimed at encouraging people to get out into the green space. Users are prompted when they get near a green space, and they can upload comments and photos. And there's a before and after survey to capture any changes in well-being after using the app for 1 month. So we're trying to develop our own app, and one of our MSc students, Helen Mason, did a trial run in Vista. She developed this online survey using a free software tool called MapMe, where you can spray can a particular area and then enter comments about what you like or don't like and how you use that green space. So this is very helpful for finding out what did and didn't work, and she applied it as part of a bigger project we're doing in Vista, where we've also run street surveys and a drop-in event and a workshop. So we've mapped this green space value using different techniques. So as a result, we're now trying to develop an improved tool where you can upload your own customised map of green space to make the green space areas clearer. There's a choice of drawing tools for marking green space with points or polygons or spray cans, a simpler user interface with fewer questions, and perhaps the opportunity to upload photos. We're going to test this out in Essex, working with the County Council, but the idea is it can then be applied anywhere in the country. I'm just going to leave you now with some comments from people which we gathered in Vista as part of our work there. These illustrate nicely the great range of different values that people get from their local green spaces, for playing, for finding wildlife, for just looking at the view, or for learning and exploring. Since we did this work in summer, one of these spaces has already been lost, been bulldozed by developers who wanted to develop a care home on the site just for speculative purposes to try and get planning permission by devaluing the site. So, there is a real danger that this is happening, and we hope that our tool will gather structured evidence to help make these benefits and these values of green spaces more visible to decision makers.
Thank you, Alison. There's a very nice conservation theme amongst both those two, though I note that Alison goes around virtually graffitiing things with her spray can, which is quite nice. A change of tack. The nice thing about geography departments is our diversity, and now we go to the muddy world of finance with Derek.
Good afternoon. Skyscrapers, housing, financial and related services have been symbols of modern capitalism for about 100 years. And at present, whether we like it or not, we all live in the shadow of financial crises. Austerity, Brexit, wave of populism are all part and parcel of the legacy of the global financial crisis and the Eurozone crisis. And financial geography can help us make sense of this predicament and these challenges. It can be defined as the study of the evolution and governance of money and finance in space and time and their implications for economy, society, and natural environment. I think we live in very exciting times for financial geography. Think about Brexit and its implications for the City of London and the British economy. Think about President Donald Trump threatening to roll back financial regulation in the US. Or Shanghai vying to become the global financial center by 2020. Or consider financial technology, fintech, available on our smartphones, on computers, that promises to revolutionize the way we use financial services. And geography can help make sense of all of these developments. Finance is also arguably one of the most globalized and networked of human activities. So to understand it better, we need a global research network. Over the last couple of years, with colleagues around the world, we have developed an informal network of people interested in financial geography. And with time, we try to formalize this network. Last year, we launched the Global Network on Financial Geography. A few months ago, we launched the website, which was designed by a DPhil student at this department, Theodor Kojoyanu. We secured a little bit of funding from Regional Studies Association and from Free University of Brussels, and we were lucky to secure additional funding from the Inspiration Fund. This funding helped me perform my functions as the chair of the global network, so I could hire Marcel Metzner, one of our MPhil students, who helped me maintain the website, develop some social media presence, and support me in other functions as the chair of the network. What have we achieved? Despite short history, our network has grown to over 400 members from nearly 50 countries around the world and is growing fast. 47% of our members are geographers, but there are also many economists, sociologists, political scientists, anthropologists, and other social and not necessarily just social scientists. So it's becoming a more and more interdisciplinary network. Majority of members are academics, but we have plenty of people from policy making, government, international organizations, and the private sector as well. A few months ago, we also launched a working paper series on financial geography, and papers cover a wide variety of topics. They talk about connections between different stock markets, what influences stock prices, and how these factors are transmitted around the world, from Tokyo to London through to New York. In another paper, we talk about a mysterious discrepancy between two most important global oil prices, North Sea oil price and the Texas oil price, that arose in 2010-2015. In a recent paper with Vladimir Pajitka, we talk about implications of connectivity and clustering for performance of financial firms. There are papers that talk about financialization of housing in China and urbanization in China. Did you know, for example, that at present the US financial sector actually employs fewer women than it did before the crisis? And in general, the financial sector is at least as male-dominated as it was 10 years ago. So no good news there. We've organized a series of events, nearly a dozen just this year, including a workshop on finance, geography and sustainability at MIT. Next week we're meeting in Singapore at a conference on global financial and production networks. I'm very excited that we will organize next year the first Fingeo Spring School, which is targeted at young academics interested in financial geography, not necessarily geographers. And with young people in mind, we will also award another Fingeo Dissertation Prize. So if you know anyone finishing a PhD on a topic related to financial geography, let us know. Our long-term objective is to make the Global Network on Financial Geography a go-to place for researchers, finance professionals, policymakers, go-to place for research and research-informed commentary on any topics related to finance and geography. So again, I think we live in very exciting times for this area of research. Financial geography is really conducive to helping us to understand the world and its trajectory. Think, for example, of the rise of China in geopolitical and geoeconomic terms. It's difficult to understand without considering liberalization of Chinese financial markets or internationalization of the Chinese currency. Only a few weeks ago, the deputy governor at the Bank of England entitled his speech Geofinance, talking about the significance of borders and geography in general for finance. So to find out more and join us, please go to fingeo.net. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darek. And I think something to say is that the very small sums of money that each of these projects have received is clearly having a big sort of multiplier effect and going a long way to contribute to wider projects and activities, which is our big plan. Now, I like Africa, and I'm very pleased to say that the next talk by Nancy and Saskia takes us to Kenya.
So hi everybody, thanks very much for being here. Nancy and I are going to talk about an initiative that we started this year to help support water clubs in Kenyan secondary schools. This initiative grew out of the UpGrow Research Consortium, under which Oxford is leading a project called Grow for Good, which is groundwater risk management for growth and development, and we're focusing on an area in coastal Kenya. So people who understand groundwater are better able to manage and protect it, and we believe that that understanding can and should start with youth. So as an outreach effort from the Grow for Good project, we wanted to connect with a group, call them school children, call them young adults, call them stakeholders, call them future leaders, but a group that are often not engaged with the research community. And we wanted to help them learn about groundwater. We got a lot of support for this from our UpGrow team, from Base Titanium, which is a mining company that operates in the Grow for Good study area, and of course from the School of Geography through the Inspiration Fund. So we're currently working with 3 schools. We started by approaching some teachers who then brought the idea to their students, and the students really from the get-go took ownership of that idea, and they formed clubs that they have consistently been committing after school and weekend hours to. We asked them why they wanted to participate in this. This is an excerpt of what one of the students, Fatuma Khatib, wrote to us. She said that she has a desire to learn, but also really wants to share that knowledge with her home community, and that was something that was echoed by many of the students. So these clubs are really working because of teacher commitment, teacher involvement, and also they're very student driven. So that means that we're continuously asking questions and encouraging them to ask us questions and give us feedback. And through that process, the scope of the clubs has grown. So we've widened the focus to include basics of the water cycle and geology, and also from hearing from the students about the water-related challenges that they and their families face. We've brought in more information on water quality, treatment, conservation, among other things. We've supplied phones and data plans so that we can communicate with the clubs from the UK using WhatsApp. And we started this blog, there's the web address, so that the students can write about some of their activities and share their learning. We've drawn on local partnerships, particularly with Base Titanium, to further support the clubs, and have really made an effort to let the students speak with researchers and practitioners so that they can get some insight into potential water-related career paths that they might want to explore. And finally, we're really encouraging learning by doing activities and going on field trips. So as pictured here, some of the activities that have been done so far have included group concept mapping, for the students to learn from each other and also to give us an idea about what they already know and where there are gaps in their understanding. They've done some exercises with aquifer model kits to learn about how groundwater is stored and moves in the ground, and how contamination can spread. They visited the mine site to learn a bit about industrial water management, and some of them were actually able to see a borehole being drilled. They've done water quality testing of different sources, and also to test the effectiveness of a ceramic water filter that actually one of the teachers had developed. And each of the clubs installed rain gauges at their schools and have learned how to collect the rainfall data from those. So now I'll hand over to Nancy, and she's going to talk a bit more about the ongoing work.
Thanks, Saskia. So we're also using a project-based learning approach to help students practice real-world skills like planning, problem-solving, and communications. So students at one school have divided themselves into small groups, and each group has chosen a topic to explore, and this is the list of the topics that they've come up with. Some of the projects will be based on students doing their own research. For example, one group will be presenting on water conservation in farming, and another is looking into health effects of water pollution. Other projects will involve practical demonstrations, such as one group that's planning to build a model water filter. And we're arranging an event next year when students can show their projects to the head teachers and to Kenyan researchers from the Kenyan universities and local officials from the Ministry of Education. The students only have internet access once or twice a week on the club phone, so the ongoing challenge is to provide enough resources that are targeted at the right level so that they can do their own research into all these topics. And we've been developing a resource pack backed up with an online document library of background materials that have been printed out for the students to use. So this is the second draft of the student resource, which has been reviewed by club members, by the teachers involved in the club, and by the Grow for Good project researchers. And we're now addressing all their comments and adding activities for each module. And we're also including ideas for practical projects that the schools could do, for example, water conservation methods that they could try out in their school vegetable plots. So the big question now is, where should we go from here? So we're looking for ways to maximise the legacy of what we've achieved this year with the clubs. But we also need to encourage schools to sustain the clubs once the project fieldwork in the area ends. And ideally, we'd also like to scale this up in a sustainable way so we can get more secondary students in Kenya to learn about these topics. And a key step in this will be to develop an educator's guide to go with the student booklet, to describe the teachers' roles and what would be needed to run particular activities. And we'll also need a way to disseminate the resources and to encourage and support schools that want to join in. So ideas we're exploring include developing a website where water experts and educators in Kenya can sign up and volunteer to deliver water champion activities in schools. And we're also thinking about how we could continue to use the WhatsApp connections to enable a role for people with water expertise who aren't based in Kenya, so that they could guide the clubs or respond to student questions in some way. And we've got some networks that we've identified that could help with this, for example, the Pan-African Conservation Education Project. And we're also looking for partner organisations in Kenya that might be able to help to support the teachers One approach we're looking at is to link up with digital education providers to promote project-based learning about water at the same time as helping students to develop their computer skills. And we've been experimenting with this in the existing clubs because many of the students have said that they're very keen to use computers to prepare their projects. And we were able to get some laptops from a UK charity called IT Schools Africa, which the research team have kindly carried out to Kenya, ready for the students to use next term. So thank you very much to the research team for all your support with this project, and thanks to the Inspiration Fund, and we'd be delighted to have any feedback on the project. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I feel very inspired by these talks. I think they're wonderful. I really like that. If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. That's fantastic. Next up is the only man from Spain that I know who doesn't like hot places, and therefore Mark decided to apply to the Inspiration Fund to set up something that's actually notably lacking in Oxford, which is a way of networking people working in polar regions. Mark.
Okay, just to put some perspective, I was born in 1977. 2 years later, satellites were already able to monitor on a spatially and temporally continuous way many aspects of the Earth system. In 1979, we have the first complete spatially explicit image of the Arctic minimum extent at that time. That's how it looked like. This is September 2012. You can see that things have changed quite a lot. September 2012 is not, it's definitely an outlier in the sense that it's the minimum, but it's not an outlier overall. If we look at the overall trends of Arctic sea ice extent in the polar regions. This plot here shows you the annual cycle of area occupied by sea ice in the Arctic, which goes from a winter maximum of about 15 to 16 million square kilometers to a summer minimum, which happened in September after the warm season, which used to be around 5 or 6 million square kilometers, and it's now around 4, sometimes below. So in about 30 years we have lost, well, 40 years we have lost over 3 million square kilometers of sea ice. Not only we have lost area, we have also lost volume. The remaining sea ice is much thinner, so overall we have lost about 10,000 cubic kilometers of sea ice during these last 40 years. This is a huge change, probably one of the largest changes in the Earth system that we have experienced in the last decades. And it's a huge component for a characteristic that the Arctic region has, which is its climate hypersensitivity. Due to the feedbacks linked with sea ice and snow, when the Arctic warms up, it warms up much faster than the global latitudes. In this plot here of average temperatures, in blue you have the Arctic temperatures, and in red or brown you're having the global averages. You can see that when the trends are up, the pace is much faster. This would be starting in the late 19th century up to the present. More or less, we could say that the Arctic is warming at least twice the rate of warming than the global average. This is called the Arctic amplification, which means that things like the 2 degrees threshold or the 1.5 degree thresholds that we are trying to agree at the COP meetings are already surpassed in the Arctic. So we are living in a, I wouldn't say a new normal, because we are not in any normal. We still don't know where we're heading. The trends are still there. So what does this mean? Well, it means way too many things. The most obvious one is what's going to happen with all these changes in the Arctic to the natural system, in the Arctic, to the Arctic biota. Not only the Arctic biota, much of it adapted to sea ice, but also the Arctic weather and climate, which actually goes beyond the Arctic and into affecting us all. Arctic warming also carries with it big changes in the permafrost, in the permanent frozen ground. And not only that, all these things are affecting Arctic inhabitants, many of which have traditional livelihoods which are being completely modified by the current changes. And they are making the Arctic more accessible. The fact that the Arctic is more accessible means that, for example, some global trade routes are starting to take place along the northern Arctic seas, which are more and more free of ice. You're having much more accessible lands and oceans to natural resource extraction, and the whole of these Arctic changes are bringing geopolitical changes. The Arctic has shifted from marginality to centrality for many states way beyond the Arctic states. Singapore is interested in joining the Arctic Council, for example. You couldn't imagine a least Arctic state than Singapore, located at the equator. So what does this mean? Well, this is a bit overwhelming. It means that we need a lot of expertise from many fields to really understand what's going on in this region and its impacts for its local nature, natural resource extraction, and societies. That basically requires a lot of research from many fields, and we happen to have it in Oxford. These are just a few pictures of people who have either worked with the Arctic or are working with the Arctic or the polar regions in general in the past or in the present. Many of them are completely focused on it, on this research. Others have projects that deal with it. But in all, we are dozens of people sharing polar research projects in Oxford across the three divisions of humanities, social sciences, and life sciences, and mathematics and physics. We don't only have the experience now, but we have a long history of polar expeditions and polar research in Oxford. These are pictures of a 1923 expedition to Svalbard. Members of this expedition included Charles Elton, the famous ecologist, who actually wrote quite a lot about the Svalbard ecology. And back in the early 20th century, Oxford was really interested in conducting research there. However, Oxford is not really identified globally as an Arctic or as a polar hub. We are many, but we are not organized. We don't have a go-to place or a go-to resource that identifies us as a polar institution, contrary to other places which are really highlighting this expertise. That's why I applied for money from the Inspiration Fund to have a first step towards actually creating or highlighting this community, which would be the creation of a website. This website is running, but needs to be more updated and populated. That's why we have. That's why I have these resources that I'm in the process of using, and it includes a list of all the people who work on polar research within the university, an up-to-date publication page, and other resources, and aims to be eventually the go-to place for polar researchers from the university and polar interested people who want to know what's going on in Oxford related to these regions from all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Very nice. Now, when I was a student in Oxford many decades ago, I used to walk past the Sheldonian Theatre and see these large featureless lumps sticking on top of stone columns. Our next award went to Martin Coombes to do something very interesting with the emperors around the Sheldonian Theatre. Martin.
Okay, thanks Dave. So I'm going to talk to you about these rather unruly looking characters for 7 minutes. You'll definitely recognise the one on the right. That's one of the existing Sheldonian Heads, currently sit outside the theatre, looming over the tourists as they take their selfies next to these rather intriguing characters. Our research group here in the school, that's the Oxford Rock Breakdown Lab, has had an interest in these heads for quite a long time. Some of us are listed up there. I should say this is the brainchild of Dr Katrin Wilhelm, who unfortunately can't be here today, but I'm really giving this talk on her behalf. You might be surprised to know that the current heads outside the Sheldonian are not the original ones. There have in fact been 3 generations of heads to sit in this location. The first set were put up in 1669, and they were part of the original design of the building by Sir Christopher Wren. This one, by the way, on the left is in the relative comfort of the Provost Garden at Worcester College at the moment. The original heads lasted pretty well, so they were around 200 years later. It wasn't until they'd become sufficiently weathered that they were replaced in 1867, 1868. Unfortunately, the second set of heads deteriorated extremely rapidly, so they only lasted half the time of the first set. And you can see here, this middle image shows one of these second generation heads soon before they were replaced again, and you can see just how blackened they'd become from the dirty Oxford's sooty air. So the third generation, the ones we know today, were put up in 1972. They were designed and sculpted by a local stonemason, Michael Black. So these have a long and rather intriguing history of replacement and repair, and what we're trying to do is understand that as a process of heritage conservation, and we're doing that in a number of ways. And what I tried to do, we're doing a lot of activities, but I've tried to summarise them under these three broad categories here. The first one I've called is research and rescue, and what we're trying to do primarily is identify where these first and second generation heads have ended up. And at the moment we're doing really, really well. We found over 20 of these. They're scattered around Oxford in various locations and beyond Oxford as well. And I'll say something about the rescuing work that we've done for some of the heads that were kind of in immediate danger of being lost. We've also, through the Inspiration Fund, been able to get on board a dedicated archivist, and Sue Bird is doing a fantastic job of trawling through the university's archives in the Bodleian libraries to really try and reveal how much these figures have become ingrained, not only in literature writing, but also academic works, art, photography, even poetry. These heads crop up in all manner of interesting ways, and we're trying to piece together that as a story. We're doing some physical science as well. So our research group here in the school are very interested in the materials that these are made from, how they've responded to being exposed to the environment, how they've decayed, why they decayed. All of these types of questions we're trying to answer through some physical science that we'll be doing. And then lastly, what I've broadly called outreach. Not only does that relate to some of the things that I've already mentioned, but in particular we are very excited to have an exhibition that's recently been approved. That will happen in association with the Bodleian Library. That will take place in 2019, which rather neatly coincides with the 350th anniversary of the original set of heads. Just to show sort of some of the fun we've been having with this as a project so far, these images just illustrate the sorts of things that I've already mentioned. You can see some of the archival photographs that we're unearthing from these past sets on the left. Katrin is very proudly standing next to one that we've rediscovered. This is in the private grounds of a property along Banbury Road. The one at the bottom there, looking rather sorry for itself, this rather innocuous pile of rubble, is in fact one of the original heads, we think, and then again that's in another private garden in North Oxford. And then in terms of the science, there's a rather nice 3D model that one of our team, Scott Orr, produced using photogrammetry techniques. That's one that is currently in Wadham College. And at the top there, we're starting to think about this idea of interfaces between the stone and the environment and how that's led to their deterioration over the last few hundred years. Perhaps the most important thing we've done so far under the funding that we've had from the Inspiration Fund is to rescue some heads that we found looking rather abandoned at a site in Newnham Courtney. And this was land that was owned by the university, and it seems to be where a lot of old bits of stone from Oxford's buildings have ended up. Unfortunately, this land has very recently been sold, and these were at risk of falling out of the university's hands. So we took the decision to rescue these. So after we did some survey work, we got the big guns in to move them, and what we've done is we have moved them to our research site at Wyson Woods, where they currently sit, shrink wrapped for their own protection, until we do some more work on them. So in terms of where we're going with this as a project, we have already done a lot of work already, I hope you agree, but we are having an official launch event next year, and that's primarily to start engaging with external organisations, other interested groups. So that might include local heritage organisations, university estates, perhaps even architectural historians might be very interested in this, given the connection with Christopher Wren. The headhunt continues. I had a hashtag on my previous slide, so if you want to join in the fun and you're on Twitter, hashtag find the heads, please join in. Get the word out, we want to find as many as we can. The physical science will start happening. As I've already said, we're very interested from an academic point of view about how we can use these heads as a really unique archive of stone deterioration and conservation within the city. And then, again, just to celebrate the fact that we've got this really interesting exhibition that's going to happen in 2019, our plan is that this will take place in the atrium of the Western Library, and ideally we want to bring at least one of the original set and one of the second set and bring them into the atrium and reunite them with their contemporary siblings across the road. So the Inspiration Fund has really allowed us to pursue these academic interests, but also I hope it will allow us to demonstrate how our research is important in a wider context in terms of conserving the heritage of Oxford, and I think the exhibition will be a really fantastic way to allow us to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Aren't geographers quirky? What a wonderful project. And talking of quirky, our final talk comes from Jamie. Jamie Lauren is going to talk about hedges and elephants. I have no idea what he's on about.
Great, thank you, Dave. Yeah, I think I'm here for light relief at the end of the series. So this project aimed to bring together paleoecologists, so scientists who study long-term ecology, with a collection of artists, visual artists and performance artists, to think about how we might sensitise ourselves to the ghostly presence of missing animals in the British countryside. The title Elephant in the Hedge we take from George Monbiot's book Feral, and George talks about how hedgerows, the presence of hedgerows in the British countryside, are evidence of the coexistence of hawthorn and other species with large herbivores that are now missing. You know, hedges exist because plants were smashed down and they grow back again, and people learned how to channel that ability to grow back to create hedges. So we were interested in sensitising ourselves to the ghostly presence of these large herbivores in the context of discussions of rewilding. So rewilding is a new approach to nature conservation that's coming to the fore, which tries to make a case for the reintroduction of keystone species. So species that are able to have landscape scale effects upon their ecologies when they're reintroduced. So wolves, cows, and perhaps even elephants. You know, how might we imagine the return of the elephant to the British countryside as a provocation to think differently about conservation in the present? Okay, so to do so, we went to NEP. Now, NEP is the largest rewilding project in the UK, and we hosted a 3-day residential workshop at NEP in which we brought together paleoecologists and artists and engaged in a set of activities. NEP used to be a dairy farm. It's located in Sussex, just outside of Brighton. And about 20 years ago, the owners of the farm took off the dairy cattle and introduced large herds of native breeds of British cattle, horses and pigs. So Tamworth pigs, English longhorn cattle, and Exmoor ponies. And they still run it as a farm to a certain extent, but most of the revenue comes from safaris, high-end hospitality, glamping. So we stayed in their glamping facilities. Meat, they still eat the animals, and in fact part of the hospitality is based around eating the wild animals that are on the site, and they get the ongoing subsidies that sustain British agriculture at the present. So what we did is we went to NEP and we were there for 3 days. This was a collaboration with David Overend, who works in the Performance Studies Department at Royal Holloway, and Daniel Shreve, who's a paleoecologist and a geographer at Royal Holloway. And we engaged in a set of structured activities over these 3 days. So we started off with a series of talks from Charlie Burrell, who is the person who runs NEP, who is chair of Rewilding England, who talked about rewilding, talked about their experience on the site. We had a series of talks from David and from Danielle and from I, setting up rewilding and what paleoecologists and performance artists might learn from each other. The next day we then went on a a safari. So this is a visualization of the film. They have these amazing Belgian troop carriers. So Penny took us out around the estate and showed us some of the wildlife, showed us what had been going on in the site, and trained both the paleoecologists, who perhaps didn't know much about the contemporary ecology, but also the artists as to what's been going on, what are the interesting ecological developments that have been taking place at this site. We then commissioned Phil Jones, who's a cultural geographer and creative walking practitioner, to design a subversive walk around the site to get us to think differently about what's being played out through the ecological changes that are underway at this location. And one of the things that really struck us from camping in October at this location, not only was it very cold, but also the deer rut was underway. I don't know if anyone's heard of deer rut. It's a very impressive soundscape. So we were all lying in our tents with no idea what was going on, and it sounded pretty wild, it sounded pretty epic. And all of us had sort of, I guess, really been struck by how noisy the British countryside would have been not so long ago. So Phil had us blindfolded, and we learned to listen in different ways to the soundscape of Nep. He also had us doing various kind of creative interactions with the ecology of the site to begin to think differently about what was happening. So that was in the morning, and then in the afternoon we had a set of closely curated workshops with a performance studies practitioner who got us to work in pairs to think about ways in which we could engage creatively with some ecological process that was underway in the site that we experienced it. So I was very struck by the acorns that were falling. A lot of the architecture had these corrugated iron roofs, and the acorns were falling, and it was a very, again, dramatic soundscape. And spent some time with an artist looking at how the acorns moved around both as they bounced off the roof, but also looking at the role of the jays and other animals that distributed these acorns as an ecological process. We were then brought together to try and create in aggregate a performance piece based on the duets of these artist-scientist collaborations. So this image, bottom centre, is the Professor of Cultural Geography at Royal Holloway channeling stork migration along with other paleoecologists to try and think about the movement of birds through this landscape. Okay, so we had a lot of fun doing this. In terms of outputs, we have a paper for Geohumanities, which is a geography journal at the kind of arts science interface, a set of artworks produced by some of the artists that we brought along. So these are some reflections on the site, some of the key concepts from Sarah Hopfinger, who was one of the artists we invited. This is another image produced by one of the artists, again trying to think about collage and elephants and hedges in this context. We made a short film, and we've really built now, I think, a network for future research collaborations. It was, there's quite a lot of trust building required for these kind of experiments. People put themselves at risk, people embarrass themselves, and there's a real kind of nice atmosphere now linking artists and scientists together. So we're planning to write an application to the Leverhulme to build a research network to design a big project. David wants to develop a site-based performance at NEP. This is David over and inspired by the deer that he encountered to think about how you might use the landscape. Phil Jones writes these wonderful handbooks, the counter-tourism handbooks. The subtext there is a handbook for those who want more from heritage sites than a tea shop and an old thing in a glass case. And Phil's very keen to write some sort of counter-tourism handbooks about nature reserves, to think about how you might read these nature reserves differently, to think about longer ecological dynamics, to think about some of the politics of these sites that we might do not only in nature reserves but in places closer to home. So how might you bring this back to the hedgerows of North London to get people to think about some of these ghostly absences in these locations? Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. So we started with heritage and we ended with heritage, and in between we've been to Africa, the polar regions, the local environment, and finance and elsewhere, and I'm sorry if I've forgotten anybody's talk there. I like speedy talks like that. I think it gives a fantastic take on how diverse what we do in this department is. So on behalf of myself, David Thomas and the Research Committee and Gillian Willis, I'd like to thank our speakers again. I'd also like to say that this is, I think, has been a very good experiment, Heather, in terms of how a very small sum of money can go a huge distance in terms of setting up new activities and new types of research in the department. These all 7 projects and our 8 speakers, none have received more than a couple of £1,000 and some a few £100. And out of that, in terms of value for money, I think has come something very wonderful. So let me leave it at that. We now have lunch, Gillian, don't we, in the Gilbert room for anybody who would like lunch. So with that, please thank our brilliant speakers again, and thank you very much.